The human fleet arrived at the Vorth, homeworld like a calm wind in the middle of a hurricane. Korath watched from the bridge as Ambassador Park ordered her ships to take positions between the Vethrani blockade and the planet below. Their weapons powered down and their shields set to minimum. Attention Vethrani vessels. She broadcast on all frequencies. We are establishing a humanitarian corridor to deliver aid to the civilian population of Vorth. We intend no hostile action and request that you allow our ships to pass. The response came within seconds. Angry and threatening human vessels. You have no authority here. Withdraw immediately or face consequences. Ambassador Park did not flinch. We acknowledge your warning. We are proceeding with humanitarian operations. The human ships move forward. Slow and steady, making no aggressive maneuvers. Korath held his breath as targeting systems from a dozen Vethrani warships locked onto them. They will fire, he said quietly. My people do not bluff. Perhaps, Ambassador Park replied. But we are not going to let children starve to protect ourselves from risk. The lead Vethrani commander, a veteran named Admiral Daxum Korath recognized from his military service, appeared on the communication screen with fury in his compound eyes. Ambassador Park, I remember you from Meridian Prime. You were foolish then, and you were foolish now. Do you think we will hesitate to destroy your ships? I think you might, she replied calmly. And I think if you do, you will have to live with what you have done for the rest of your life. She leaned forward slightly, her voice softening. Admiral Dex, there are 8 million people on that planet who have never raised a weapon against anyone. They are artists and teachers and families who want nothing but to live in peace. Are you truly willing to kill them to prove a political point? The Admiral stared at her through the screen, and Korath saw something shift in his expression. You are interfering in a lawful military operation. I am trying to save lives, Ambassador Park corrected. Yours as well as theirs, because if you fire on unarmed ships delivering food and medicine to civilians, you will become something you cannot come back from. The standoff stretched for long minutes that felt like hours, and then, without warning, the Vethrani ships powered down their weapons and moved aside. Admiral Dex appeared on screen one final time. Deliver your aid. Human, but do not think this changes anything. Ambassador Park nodded respectfully. It changes nothing except that 8 million people will eat. Tonight sometimes that is enough. The human convoy descended to the Vor's surface, and Korath went with them to help distribute supplies. He walked through crowds of grateful beings who wept with relief and clutched packages of food and medicine like treasures beyond price. And he saw human volunteers treating Vorth children with the same gentle care they would show their own families. Word spread across the galaxy. Within hours, humans had faced down a Vethrani blockade without firing a single shot. Humans had delivered aid to a besieged population while warships watched and did nothing to stop them. Humans had proven that courage did not require weapons, and that strength could be expressed through compassion. The effect was not immediate, but it was profound on a Kralosi warship. A commander who had been planning an attack on a human convoy quietly canceled the operation on the Galactic Council station. Councilor Marith watched the footage with tears streaming down her face and finally felt hope for the first time in months. And across the war zone, beings who had been raised to see only enemies began to wonder if another way might be possible. The human fleet continued its work for weeks that stretched into months. They established refugee corridors, delivered medical supplies to devastated colonies, and served as neutral ground where representatives from warring factions could meet safely. They never claimed credit or demanded recognition. They simply showed up wherever suffering existed and did what they could to help. The turning point came on a Vethrani colony that human medical ships had been supporting for 3 Weeks a Kralosi strike had devastated the main settlement, and human doctors were treating hundreds of wounded civilians when a second wave of attackers arrived. The humans did not flee. Instead, they positioned their unarmed medical ships between the colony and the Kralosi fleet and continued treating patients while weapons locked onto them. And then something extraordinary happened. Vethrani military vessels arrived to defend the colony, and instead of engaging the Kralosi, they positioned themselves alongside the human ships. Shields extended to protect both. A Vethrani commander broadcast a message that reached every ship in the system. These humans came to help our people when they had every reason to let us suffer. They showed us mercy we did not deserve. We will not allow them to be harmed for that kindness. The Kralosi commander hesitated, seeing enemies who had been killing each other for months now standing together. This is not how war works, he transmitted in confusion. No, the Vethrani commander replied. This is how peace begins. The Kralosi fleet withdrew within a week. Both sides had requested human mediation for a ceasefire within a month. The ceasefire had become a formal armistice within a year. The Galactic Accord had dissolved and been replaced by something new, a galactic cooperative, founded on principles that humanity had demonstrated through action rather than words. Korath stood beside Ambassador Park at the founding assembly, now serving as the first Vethrani ambassador to the new organization. He watched humans take their place, not at the edge of galactic affairs, but at the center. Not because they had demanded power, but because they had earned trust. You saved U.S., he said quietly as the ceremony proceeded around the ambassador. Park shook her head. You saved yourselves. We just reminded you that you could. She looked out at the gathered representatives, ancient powers and young species, former enemies and new allies, all choosing to build something better than what had come before. The galaxy was never broken because humanity left. She continued. It was broken because beings stopped believing that kindness mattered more than power. We just had to show them that another way was possible. Korath thought about everything he had witnessed, the compassion, the courage, the patient determination to do right regardless of cost. Why? He asked one final time. Why did you keep trying, even when we gave you every reason to walk away forever? Ambassador Park smiled, and in her expression Korath saw the answer that had guided humanity through every trial and every triumph. Because you are worth saving, she said simply. All of you, even the ones who laughed at us, even the ones who hurt us, because giving up on people is the one thing we refuse to do. She placed a hand on his shoulder, as she had done months before when he first arrived, broken and ashamed. And now you know why. Go teach your people, Ambassador Korath, and help them become who they were always capable of being. He bowed his head in acceptance, carrying her words like a light that would guide him through all the years to come. Outside the assembly hall, the stars waited, no longer a cold and indifferent void, but a galaxy finally beginning to understand what humanity had tried to teach them from the very beginning, that compassion was not weakness, that kindness was not naivety, and that the smallest species could change everything simply by refusing to stop caring. Korath had lived among the humans for 2 months when he finally began to understand what made them different from every other species in the galaxy. It was not their technology, which remained modest compared to the ancient powers. It was not their military strength, which could not match the vast fleets of the Vethrani or Kralosi. It was not even their intelligence, which fell within normal ranges for spacefaring species. What made humanity unique was something far simpler and far more powerful. They genuinely cared about beings who were not themselves. He watched Ambassador Park spend an entire day helping a Thesan family navigate the refugee registration process. Even though she had 100 more important tasks waiting, He saw human doctors work through the night to save a Krylosi soldier who had been shooting at their ships just days before, treating him with the same care they would give their own children. He observed human engineers teaching refugees how to repair their broken ships, sharing knowledge freely rather than hoarding it for advantage. And everywhere he looked, he found humans building connections, forming friendships, creating community with species who had nothing to offer them in return. "Why do you do this?" he asked Ambassador Park one evening as they shared a meal in the station's communal dining hall. "These people mocked you, dismissed you, drove you away. Why help them now?" She considered the question while chewing a piece of bread. And Korath appreciated that she did not give him an immediate answer, because helping them is the right thing to do. She said finally, and because doing the right thing does not depend on whether people deserve it. Korath shook his head in confusion. That makes no sense. Resources are limited. Time is limited. Why waste either on those who showed you no respect? Ambassador Park smiled. And Korath saw both sadness and something that might have been hope in her expression. "That is exactly why we left the Accord," she explained. "Because the galaxy thinks in terms of deserving and earning and calculating return on investment. But some things should not be transactions." She gestured at the dining hall around them, where humans and refugees from a dozen species ate together, laughed together, comforted each other through shared grief. "Compassion is not a resource that runs out," she continued. "Kindness is not diminished by being given freely. The more you practice caring for others, the more capacity you develop to care." Korath thought about her words for days afterward. Watching the human settlement with new eyes, he saw how their approach created trust that spread outward like ripples in water. Refugees who had been helped by humans began helping others in turn. Species who had been enemies found common ground in shared gratitude. A community was forming that crossed every boundary the galaxy had ever drawn between peoples. And then the delegation arrived from the Galactic Council. Korath watched from a distance as 3 senior representatives disembarked from a diplomatic vessel, their formal robes and ceremonial staffs marking them as beings of great importance. They carried themselves with the confidence of those accustomed to obedience, expecting humans to be honored by their presence. Ambassador Park met them at the docking bay with a small team of aides, her posture respectful but not subservient. The Galactic Council formally requests the return of humanity to full membership in the Accord. The lead delegate announced without preamble, "We are prepared to offer certain considerations in recognition of your past contributions." Korath watched Ambassador Park's expression remain carefully neutral. What considerations does the Council offer? The delegate produced a document and began reading terms that sounded generous to anyone unfamiliar with. Galactic Politics Observer status on the High Council. Guaranteed representation in trade negotiations. Formal acknowledgement of human contributions to diplomatic efforts. But Korath noticed what was missing. No apology for the contempt humanity had endured. No admission that the Council had been wrong to dismiss human proposals. No commitment to change the fundamental attitudes that had made human withdrawal necessary and conditions. So many conditions. Humanity would return as junior partners, their voice advisory rather than binding, their role defined by the ancient powers rather than earned through merit. "You are offering us the privilege of serving you again," Ambassador Park said when the delegate finished, and her voice held no anger, only clarity. "You want us to return to fixing problems while receiving no respect and no real power to prevent those problems from occurring." The delegate bristled at her bluntness. "We are offering you a place at the table of galactic civilization." "You are offering us a seat at the children's table," Ambassador Park corrected. "While the adults continue making decisions that destroy innocent peoples and start wars that could have been prevented." She shook her head slowly. "The United Earth Confederation declines your offer." The delegation departed in visible frustration, and Korath overheard one of them muttering about human arrogance and ingratitude. But Ambassador Park did not seem troubled by their reaction. Instead, she called a meeting of human leadership that evening, and Korath was permitted to attend as an observer. The council's offer confirms what we suspected, she told the assembled humans. They want us back as tools, not as equals. They have not learned anything from our absence. A military commander spoke up from across the table. Then what do we do? The war is spreading. Millions are dying, and the Vorath will not survive another month under blockade. Ambassador Park looked around the room at her people, diplomats and soldiers, scientists and engineers, ordinary citizens who had left everything behind to build something new. We cannot save the galaxy, she said, but we can save people. We can show them what we believe through our actions rather than our words. She stood and activated a holographic display showing the war zone and the suffering populations trapped within it. Human ships will enter contested space, she announced. Not as members of the Accord, not as allies of either side, but as ourselves. We will protect civilians, rescue refugees, and provide aid to anyone who needs it, regardless of their species or political alignment. The room fell silent as her people absorbed the implications. The council will condemn us for interference, someone pointed out. Let them. Ambassador Park replied, we are not doing this for the council. We are doing this for each other, for every being in that war zone who deserves a chance to survive. She looked at Korath with an expression that made him feel seen in a way no one from his own species had ever managed. And perhaps, when the galaxy watches what we do, some of them will begin to understand what we tried to teach them all along. The vote was unanimous. 3 days later, the first human fleet jumped into the war zone, broadcasting a single message that reached every species in the galaxy. We are not here for your council. We are here for each other. Korath stood on the bridge of the lead ship beside Ambassador Park and watched the stars streak past as they raced toward the blockaded Vorath homeworld. For the first time since the war began, he felt something other than despair. He felt hope. 6 months after the humans walked away from Meridian Prime, the galaxy-burned Counselor Mirith watched the war unfold from her station quarters. Her screens filled with reports of battles, casualties, and atrocities that grew worse with each passing day. The Vithrani Dominion and the Krylosi Federation had finally stopped pretending to negotiate and unleashed their full military might against each other. Fleets clashed in the Outer Rim, turning inhabited systems into war zones where civilian ships were destroyed alongside military vessels. The 3 neutral species caught between the warring powers faced extinction not as collateral damage but as deliberate targets. Thesan Prime had fallen first, its population scattered across refugee camps on a dozen worlds where they slowly starved while the council debated allocation of resources. The Janari people had evacuated their homeworld just before Krylosi forces seized it as a forward base, leaving behind everything their civilization had built over 10,000 years, and the Vorath pacifists who had never developed weapons of any kind found themselves trapped on their single world as Vithrani warships established a blockade that allowed nothing in or out. Mirith had screamed at the council until her voice gave out, demanding action to protect these innocent peoples. She had received nothing but excuses and delays. We cannot intervene without appearing to take sides, the delegates told her. We must remain neutral to preserve our position as potential mediators. But there were no mediators anymore. The humans who had spent 80 years building relationships with every major and minor species, who had earned trust through decades of honest dealing and selfless service, were gone, and no one who remained possessed the credibility or skill to bring the warring powers to the table. A young Vethrani officer named Korath watched the war from a different perspective. Standing on the bridge of a destroyer as it bombarded a Krylosi colony from orbit, he had joined the military to protect his people, to serve the Dominion with honor as his ancestors had done for generations beyond counting. But this was not protection, and there was no honor in what he witnessed: children running through burning streets, families huddled in shelters that could not withstand the weapons raining down from above, screams that came through intercepted communications before cutting off suddenly into silence. Target neutralized, his commanding officer announced with satisfaction. And Korath felt something break inside him. He thought of the human ambassador he had met once at a diplomatic reception, a small female who had spoken to him with genuine curiosity about Vethrani culture and history. She had seemed so young, so naive, asking questions that any educated being should have known the answers to. But she had listened to his answers with real interest. And when she had left, he had felt somehow that she understood his people better than most of his own colleagues. That ambassador had tried to prevent this war. She had offered a compromise that would have protected everyone, that would have allowed the Vethrani and Krylosi to resolve their dispute without destroying innocent civilizations. And his government had laughed at her. His species had mocked her proposal as primitive and her people as children, playing at diplomacy. Now those children were gone, and the sophisticated ancient powers they had left behind were burning entire worlds to prove points that no one would remember in a century. Korath requested a leave of absence, citing personal reasons that his superiors did not bother to investigate. He boarded a civilian transport and made his way through war-torn space, dodging patrols and border checkpoints, until he reached the edge of human-controlled territory. Their frontier posts were nothing like he expected. No massive defense platforms, no fleets of warships, no weapons pointed outward at potential enemies. Instead, he found stations that welcomed refugees from the war zone, providing food and shelter and medical care to beings who had lost everything. He watched humans working side by side with species from across the galaxy, treating wounded soldiers who had been shooting at them weeks before, feeding children whose parents had called humanity primitive and worthless. They did not ask where the refugees came from or which side they supported. They simply helped anyone who needed help. Korath found Ambassador Park at a refugee processing center, personally reviewing cases to ensure no one was turned away. She looked older than he remembered, tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. But her eyes remained kind as she listened to each desperate story with patience and compassion. He waited until she had finished her work for the day before approaching her. "Ambassador Park," he said, and she turned to look at him with an expression of mild surprise. "I am Korath of the Vethrani Dominion. I have come to beg you to save my galaxy from destroying itself." She studied him for a long moment before gesturing to a quiet corner where they could speak privately. "Why should we?" she asked, and her voice held no anger, only genuine curiosity. "Your government rejected our help when it was offered. Your High Speaker called us primitive and celebrated our departure." "He was wrong," Korath said. "We were all wrong. I have seen what we have become without you, and it shamans me beyond words." He told her about the burning colonies and the screaming children, about the refugees dying in camps and the neutral species facing extinction. He told her about Counselor Mirith's research and how it had revealed everything humanity had done for the galaxy without recognition or reward, and he told her about the growing faction within the Council that wanted to ask humanity to return, blocked only by pride and politics and the stubborn refusal of ancient powers to admit they had made a catastrophic mistake. Ambassador Park listened to everything without interrupting, her face unreadable. "Come with me," she said when he had finished, and she led him through the station to an observation deck where he could see human ships arriving with more refugees and departing to rescue more. "We are doing what we can from here," she told him. "We will not return to the Accord. That system was broken long before we joined it, and our presence only masked the decay." Karth felt despair wash over him. "Then there is no hope." Ambassador Park looked out at the stars for a long moment before answering. "I did not say that," she replied. And something in her voice made Korath look up with sudden attention. "I said we would not return to the Accord. I did not say we would do nothing." She turned to face him directly, and he saw in her eyes a determination that reminded him why humanity had earned respect from the smaller species who saw past the mockery of the powerful. "The galaxy must see what it has become," she said, "and then it must choose what it wants to be. We cannot make that choice for anyone. But perhaps we can show them that another way exists." She placed a hand on his shoulder with a gentleness that surprised him. "Stay with us. Korath of the Vethrani, watch and learn, and when the time comes, help your people understand what we tried to teach them before it was too late." Korath bowed his head in acceptance, knowing that his old life was over and something new was beginning outside the station. Human ships continued their work, saving lives one refugee at a time while the galaxy burned around them. 3 months after the human withdrawal, the cracks began to show. Counselor Mirith stood before her personal display screen in her quarters aboard Meridian Prime, surrounded by holographic documents that painted a picture more alarming than she had ever imagined. Her investigation had consumed every free moment since the humans departed, and what she had discovered kept her awake at night with growing dread. Trade routes that had operated smoothly for decades suddenly faced disputes that no one could resolve. The Venari Shipping Consortium and the Talaxian Merchants Guild had descended into bitter conflict over docking rights at a dozen stations, a disagreement that records showed human diplomats had quietly managed for 30 years through informal agreements and personal relationships. Now those agreements meant nothing, and commerce across an entire sector ground to a halt on the border world of Thesan Prime, the planet the Council had voted to sacrifice refugees, fled in ships barely capable of atmospheric flight, seeking shelter with neighbors who increasingly turned them away. Human aid organizations had coordinated similar crises in the past, Mirith discovered, working behind the scenes to place refugees, secure resources, and prevent the kind of humanitarian disasters that destabilized entire regions without them. The Thesan people faced extinction through neglect rather than warfare. Mirith walked through the corridors of the station and noticed what she had somehow missed before. The empty offices where human cultural attaches had worked, the abandoned meeting rooms where human mediators had held countless informal sessions, the silent communication channels that human translators had kept open between species who officially refused to speak to each other. They had been invisible in their importance. She realized, like the air one breathed without thinking until it was suddenly gone. A chime at her door interrupted her thoughts, and she opened it to find Representative Torvak of the Morvethi Collective standing in the hallway with an expression of barely controlled panic. "Counselor Mirith," he said, his gray skin even paler than usual, "I need to speak with you privately. It concerns a matter of species survival." She ushered him inside and sealed the door as he paced her small quarters, his four-fingered hands clasping and unclasping with nervous energy. "The human medical researchers," he began, and Mirith felt her stomach drop. "They were working on a treatment for our genetic condition. You know of it." She nodded, remembering the slow decline that affected all Morvathi after their 3rd century of life, a degradation that their own scientists had never been able to halt. "The humans were close to a solution," Torvak continued. "They told us perhaps another year of research and they could stabilize the condition entirely, but now they are gone, and they took their research with them." "Can you not contact them directly?" Mirith asked. Though she suspected she knew the answer, Torvak made a sound of frustration that translated across species as despair. We have tried through every channel official requests, personal appeals, even bribes offered through intermediaries, but they respond only with polite refusals and formal expressions of regret. He stopped pacing and looked at her with eyes that held 800 years of accumulated wisdom and fear. My people supported the vote against the human proposal, he admitted. We laughed when they left. I laughed. And now my species may pay for that laughter with our future. Mirith thought of the 12 species trade coalition that had collapsed last week, unable to negotiate terms without the human facilitators who had managed their competing interests for half a century. She thought of the Vethrani Krylosi, conflict escalating daily as both sides discovered that the back-channel communications humans had maintained between their governments no longer existed. She thought of the 17 smaller species who had relied on human advocacy to protect their interests in council votes, now finding themselves ignored or exploited by larger powers. I have been researching the human presence in our affairs, she told Torvak, activating her holographic display to show him the results of her investigation. And what I have found terrifies me. The documents filled her quarters with glowing text and images, detailing 80 years of human activity that had gone almost entirely unnoticed by the Galactic community. Trade disputes resolved through informal human mediation numbered in the thousands. Refugee crises managed by human coordination had saved millions of lives across dozens of species. Scientific collaborations initiated by human researchers had advanced medicine, engineering, and environmental science for nearly every member of the Accord, and political conflicts diffused by human diplomacy working quietly behind official channels had prevented at least 14 wars that would have devastated entire sectors. They held no seats on the High Council, Mirith said. They commanded no fleets. They controlled no vital resources, yet somehow they touched everything. Torvak stared at the evidence before him with an expression of growing horror. Why? He asked finally. Why did they do all of this without seeking recognition or reward? Mirith had asked herself the same question countless times during her research, and she had found only one answer that made sense. Because they believed it was right, she said simply. Because they saw suffering they could prevent and chose to prevent it. Saw conflicts they could resolve and chose to resolve them. Saw species they could help and chose to help them. She paused, remembering Ambassador Park's face as she announced the human withdrawal, not angry, not triumphant, just tired and sad. And we repaid them with contempt, Mirith continued. We mocked their proposals, dismissed their concerns, and laughed as they walked away. Torvak sank into a chair and buried his face in his hands. What do we do now? I'm going to present my findings to the council, Mirith said, though she held little hope it would change anything. They need to understand what we have lost. But when she requested time to address the full council the following week, she found herself speaking to empty seats and distracted delegates. High Speaker Varath did not bother to attend. Sending a junior aide to take notes, the Krylosi Prime Director spent the entire presentation reviewing military reports on his personal screen. Only the smaller species listened with genuine attention, their representatives exchanging knowing looks that spoke of fears confirmed when Mirith finished her presentation and called for questions. She received only silence and quickly scheduled agenda items that pushed her findings aside. The galaxy was not ready to face its mistake, but the mistake was coming for them whether they faced it or not. And somewhere in the vast darkness of unexplored space, humanity was building something new, a network of alliances with species who had left the Accord years ago, disgusted by the same arrogance and cruelty that had finally driven the humans away. The old order was crumbling, and those who would laugh loudest would soon find nothing to laugh about at all. The great chamber of Meridian Prime Station hummed with the voices of 47 species. Each delegation seated in curved rows that rose toward a ceiling of transparent crystal showing the stars. Beyond, Ambassador Una Park stood at the central podium and waited for silence. Her hands steady on the edges of the speaking platform as representatives from across the galaxy turned their attention toward her. She had prepared for this moment for 3 months, working through countless sleepless nights to craft a proposal that could prevent the coming war between two of the oldest powers in known space. The Vethrani Dominion and the Kralosi Federation had been moving toward conflict for decades, and now their dispute over territory in the Outer Rim threatened to engulf 3 smaller species caught between their borders. Honored representatives, Una began, her voice carrying clearly through the translation systems that converted her words into hundreds of languages simultaneously. I present today a compromise that addresses the core concerns of both the Vethrani Dominion and the Kralosi Federation while protecting the neutral populations who have no part in this dispute. She activated the holographic display above her podium, showing a detailed map of the contested region with proposed boundaries, shared resource zones, and protected corridors for the 3 vulnerable species. The plan had taken her team 8 months to develop. Consulting with economists, military strategists, cultural experts, and representatives from the threatened neutral worlds, it was not perfect, but it offered something rare in galactic politics, a path forward where no one had to lose everything. High Speaker Vorath of the Vethrani Dominion rose from his seat before Una had finished her presentation, his tall insectoid form casting long shadows across the delegates near him. The council recognizes the High Speaker, announced the Larathi moderator, a female of her species named Counselor Mirith, who had served in this role for over 60 years. Vorath's mandibles clicked in what Una had learned to recognize as amusement, though on his species it looked closer to contempt. "We thank our human colleagues for their primitive enthusiasm," Vorath said, and scattered laughter rippled through several delegations. "But perhaps those who have traveled among the stars for merely a century should not presume to lecture civilizations that built empires when their ancestors still lived in caves." Una kept her expression neutral, even as heat rose in her chest. 80 years humanity had served in this council, and still they heard the same dismissals, the same condescension, the same casual cruelty dressed up as wisdom. "The Vethrani Dominion rejects this proposal entirely," Vorath continued, "and moves that the council proceed with the resolution already under consideration. That resolution would designate the homeworld of the Thesan people, a peaceful species of artists and philosophers who had never harmed anyone, as a demilitarized buffer zone under joint Vethrani Kralosi control in practice. It meant the end of Thesan civilization, their world carved up and their people scattered as refugees across an indifferent galaxy. "I second the motion," called the Kralosi Prime Director, and Una watched as representatives who had smiled at her in hallways and shared meals with her delegation voted one by one to sacrifice an innocent species for political convenience. The vote passed with overwhelming support. Only 11 species voted against it, and humanity was joined only by the smallest and weakest members of the Accord, those who understood what it meant to be considered expendable. Una requested a recess, and the council granted her 30 minutes with the air of adults humoring a child. Throwing a tantrum, she walked back to her delegation where her team waited with expressions ranging from fury to despair. "Ambassador," said her aide, Jinho, a young man who had believed in the promise of galactic cooperation since childhood, "what do we do now?" Una looked at her people, diplomats, translators, analysts, and support staff who had given years of their lives to this work, and made the decision she had hoped she would never have to make. "We leave," she said quietly. The reaction was immediate. A mix of shock and something that looked almost like relief. "Gather everything," Yuna continued. "Every document, every file, every personal item. And do it quietly. We are not making a scene. We are simply going home." When the recess ended and the delegations returned to their seats, the human section remained empty. Counselor Mirith noticed first, her large eyes scanning the chamber with growing confusion until she spotted Yuna standing at the main entrance with her entire delegation behind her. Their belongings packed and their faces set with calm determination. "Ambassador Park," Mirith called out. "The session is resuming. Please take your seats." Yuna stepped forward, just far enough for her voice to carry across the suddenly silent chamber. "The United Earth Confederation formally withdraws from the Galactic Accord. Effective immediately," she announced. "We cite irreconcilable differences in ethical standards as our reason for departure." For a moment, no one spoke. Then High Speaker Vorath laughed, a harsh clicking sound that echoed off the crystal ceiling. "Let them go," he said dismissively. "What difference does one young species make? They contributed nothing but noise and naive idealism." Other delegates joined his laughter, though Yuna noticed that some remained silent, watching the departing humans with expressions she could not quite read. The Morvathi delegation leader looked stricken, and several representatives from smaller species exchanged worried glances. But the laughter drowned out any voices of concern, and the council returned to its business before the human ships had even cleared the station's docking bays. "Counselor." Mirith did not laugh. She sat in her moderator's chair and watched the empty human seats with a growing sense of unease that she could not explain in her 60 years serving the council. She had seen species come and go, alliances form and shatter, wars begin and end, but she could not recall a single major crisis in the past 80 years that had been resolved without human involvement somewhere in the process. They had been everywhere. She realized, not in positions of power, but in the spaces between, translating not just languages but intentions, building bridges that others walked across without noticing who had constructed them. She pulled up her personal database and began searching through records of council proceedings, trade negotiations, and diplomatic incidents from the past 8 decades. The more she searched, the more she found human fingerprints on outcomes she had attributed to luck or natural resolution. A trade war prevented here, a refugee crisis managed there, a dozen small conflicts diffused before they could grow into large ones. Humanity had never claimed credit for any of it. They had simply done the work because it needed to be done. And now they were gone. Mirith looked up at the celebrating council members, at High Speaker Vorath, accepting congratulations for driving away the annoying humans, and she felt something cold settle in her chest. The galaxy had just made a terrible mistake, and no one but her seemed to realize it. She saved her research files and began a more thorough investigation, hoping she was wrong, but increasingly certain she was not outside the station. The human fleet jumped to faster-than-light travel and vanished into the darkness between stars, leaving behind a galaxy that did not yet understand what it had lost.